Well, good morning. Well, I guess it's morning for some people, but happy Sabbath, everyone. And we're going to continue this study on the symbolic use of numbers. But before we begin, can you join me in a word of prayer? Dear gracious Heavenly Father, we are so thankful for the studies that you have been giving to us, the way that you have been leading us, and the way your Spirit brings conviction and power to our lives. We just invite your Spirit's presence here now as we open your word together, as we look upon our past history and come to understand how the light has unfolded to us in the past, and to have that light shine upon our path today. Be with each person, help them in their understanding, and help us as we study together. We pray and ask in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, happy Sabbath again. So obviously to this movement, we see lots of numbers, lots of symbols. And we know that these symbols, that they're part of structures. They come from the prophecies of the Bible, that they're not just random numbers that we pick out of somewhere. And the significance of a number, of course, is expressed when we see it in a line of prophecy. Now, last week, we looked at Samuel Snow's letters, and we looked at what happened with the prediction of November 9th connected to our history, to Samuel Snow's letters, right? So that the November 9th prediction had this 391 and a half days connected to October 13th. And it was part of a structure that paralleled Samuel Snow's letters. That is, our history was not just arbitrary. It was something that would be impossible to have occurred by chance. So we can see God's divine hand in it. Now, what I wanted to look at today was what happened after we had November 9th. That is, we've gone through Ezekiel, his 390 and 40 days. And we have gone through Revelation 9, Josiah Litch's understanding of those prophecies. And I have touched a little bit on how we came to July 18, 2020. So that is, we have two different symbols. From Ezekiel, we get the symbol of the 10th day of the 5th month, and you can see that on the bottom. It's kind of small. I don't know if I could zoom in there just on that. Right, so, and just to kind of review these really quickly. So Ezekiel is going to begin prophesying on July 21st, 592 BC, on the 5th day of the 4th month. And he's going to be told to lie on his left side for 390 days. And the last day that he lies on his left side is the 10th day of the 5th month. And then the next day, August 15th, he's going to begin to lie on his right side for 40 days. And he's going to be facing the siege. Right? Now, the symbol that's there is the 10th day of the 5th month. I mean, that's the primary symbol. A year later, after he finishes lying on his left side, on the 10th day of the 5th month, in 591 BC, or 590 BC, so in 591, he's going to finish lying on his left side. In 590 BC, he's going to have his third vision. That's Ezekiel 20 to 23. In chapter 24, he's going to have another vision, and that vision in Ezekiel 24 is going to be the one where he is told that the siege has begun, and that he's supposed to mark that day, even that same day. And it's kind of interesting in the Hebrew because the word there is this bone day, right? Now we know that the siege is going to begin on the 10th day of the 10th month. And just to show you this here. Now this I talk about in detail in my paper on the wave offering in Leviticus 23, where I go through all the places where this expression, uh, um, where it talks about the same day. So this expression here in Hebrew is literally bone day. And that is the Jews and many of the ancient peoples who observed the moon had these calendars. They were made from a piece of bone, and they would have a bone peg, and there would be 3 rows of 10 holes, and they would mark off the month on this calendar. So, they didn't have iPhones back then, or Fitbits, or things like that, or computers, right? So they had to keep track of the days of the month. And, obviously you could do that without a written calendar. You could remember, but people like to have something physical that they could look at. And so the idea of a bone day refers to a specific date, at least within a month, right? So he's going to write the name of this day, even the same day. Now it's going to be the 10th day of the 10th month, but it is the 10th day. And you'll find that often that this bone day is referred to as the 10th day. There's other places where the bone day is also the 10th day. Now, this is the 10th day of the 10th month, but the temple in Jerusalem is going to be destroyed on the 10th day of the 5th month, right? So that 10th day of the 5th month, in which he had this vision in chapter 20, right? It came to pass in the 7th year, in the 5th month, on the 10th day of the month. It could be argued that he's just referring that this is the same date, not the same month, but the same date, the same bone day, in which you had received this vision regarding the destruction and the siege and destruction of Jerusalem, right? And it also would go back to the last day that he laid on his left side, which would be the 10th day of the 5th month. Now, of course, he begins prophesying on the 5th day of the 4th month. So, but the point is that we have this specific date, the 10th day of the 5th month, right? So in this case, it's the 7th year in the 5th month, in the 10th day of the month, that he's going to have his third vision. The second vision, that's the one that's on the 6th month in the 6th year on the 5th day. It's going to end on the 6th day. So you get the 666 symbol, 666 symbol from his second vision. But this one, we get the 10th day of the 5th month. Okay, well, Angela asks an interesting question just about, can these bone calendars also represent the bones, chronology that comes alive as we see it's prophetic in Ezekiel 37? The messages of Palmani revive, explain the numerals and spans of the word. And there probably is a parallel there to the idea that, and we often use an expression in chronology, is that that chronology is the skeleton of history, and it's also the skeleton or the framework of biblical prophecy. So the idea that a date is a bone that needs to come to life as it's put together, and God's Spirit is breathed into it, right? And so we could say, just to carry on this illustration, and we've used this illustration a little bit dealing with, an anatomy chart where they'll have these different transparencies, and you first start with the shape of a human, and you take a transparency that's the bones, right? And then you have maybe the nerves and some of the organs, and then the muscles, and finally you keep adding these transparencies, and you have a human being. And so in Ezekiel chapter 37, Samuel says it's the soul of history. Well, it could be. I don't know if it's the soul. It definitely is the skeleton of history. And the stories of Scripture would be the sinew and the nerves and the flesh that then is placed upon this chronology. Because if you had chronology without the biblical stories to connect it together, it wouldn't really be meaningful, right? These stories, the reason why I find chronology so interesting is how it ties together all of these stories of the Bible, and it gives significance to these stories. We start to see how they're connected thematically and chronologically, and it gives us insight into their connections. But it's through the Spirit that's breathed into this that allows this to come to life, that it has its true meaning and significance. So, I mean, I'm not saying that Ezekiel 37, that the Valley of Dry Bones, does not refer to God's people, because it does. But we can see that this symbol of a bone, of a skeleton, can refer to the chronology itself. So it's the means by which God is bringing to life his people in these last days. So I want to focus a little bit on this 10th day of the 5th month. Now, so if I go back to this chart, right, so we have the symbol of the 10th day of the 5th month. And in this chart, it was just the history of Ezekiel's 10th day of the 5th month. But of course, much more comes from that. And got all these 10th days of the fifth month. And it's going to connect, obviously, to the 10th day of the 5th month. That's going to happen in this chart here. It kind of got part of it missing. So let me just bring this over. There we go. And this should be August 6th. Okay. So the 10th day of the 5th month on the biblical calendar in 70 AD is August 6th. And that's going to be the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. Now you can see between the destruction of the temple in 586 and in 70 AD, that's 655 years, right? Now, we know actually that Ezekiel counts in based upon the years of Jehoiachin's captivity, which is also his own captivity. And so it's going to be in the 11th year that the temple is going to be destroyed in 586. And in 70 AD, it's then going to be the 666th year. So Ezekiel is prophesying not just about the destruction of the temple in 586, along with Jerusalem, but also the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, along with Jerusalem. And that symbol that ties it together is the 10th day of the 5th month. And we also have something similar with the 26th day of the 4th month that you see above here. This was Josiah Litch's prophecy that parallels that of Ezekiel. So back in 2016, we recognized the 391 years and the 391 days that occur with the kings of Judah, that they were connected. And in 2018, these came together in that understanding of November 9th, right? So that we had this confirmation of November 9th on October 13th by counting 391 and a half days. And so we did that study last week. So you can see this here, this is just sort of a review of that. Here we have what happened in 2018, this different structure. It's a little bit complicated there, but you can see the 391 and a half years, it says, but it's actually days, but it's represented by those years. To November 9th, 2019. And let me see, and there it is again, so that this is a little simpler, a little clearer. not so much stuff to distract you. And so that November 9th, 2019 date has this connection to Samuel Snow's letters. So that there is the structure of Samuel Snow's letters. And so we showed it here in these two diagrams here at the top, right? Well, what happened after that is we're going to have this chart here. I'm going to move this up. I think this is what I want. Okay, so this just shows that there is this connection in Samuel Snow's letters with the 391.5, that if you count from June 22nd, that's his third letter, and you counted 391.5, you'd come to July 18th, 1845. And which was interesting. So it means there was built into this July 18th structure. Now I'm just trying to find the chart that we use. So there you see it at the bottom again, July 18th, 1845. And I got so many charts here. So which is the one I actually used? Okay, so this was my original presentation dealing with Samuel Snow's letters. I should have had this set up, but wasn't sure how I was going to do this. Here it is. So what I did in this chart that you see on the bottom is I took Samuel Snow's letters and I took, I put these dates here. You see a June 22nd, 2019. It's not quite how I drew this out, because you see Samuel Snow's letters. What I did is I put June 22nd, 2019, and I counted 391.5 days, and it came to July 18, 2020. Now that is a Julian date. So it would have been on November, I think like November 2nd, that I'm going to do this presentation in 2018. So I'm just going to check on the calendar here what the date was. So I'm at the School of the Prophets. I'd been doing lots of presentations. We had the camp meeting. Jeff had done his summary on the 28th of October. And it's going to be on that Friday, I believe, at Vespers on November 2nd, that I'm going to present this. And I'd figured it out that day. So, or at least partly. And I'm actually going to present this in a study, and it's on my YouTube page. And in this study, I show that we have, based on the 10th day of the 5th month, that we have July 18, 2020 as the 10th day of the 5th month. And that's going to mark, based upon Ezekiel's prophecy and Josiah Litch's prophecy together, but Ezekiel's is the one that gives us the 10th day of the 5th month, that we're going to have this date, July 18, 2020. So that's the first time July 18, 2020 is presented. I believe it's on November 2nd. And I'm also then going to present a week later, July 18, 2020 on the Gregorian calendar. So I kind of need to look this up and make sure I get that right, exactly when I presented these. But July 18, 2020 comes from the 10th day of the 5th month symbol, but is also connected to the structure of Samuel Snow's letters and to the 391.5. So when we get this July 18th date as a Julian date, we're still not sure about what to do with that date. That is, we don't have the second witness yet. We just have the 10th day of the 5th month. We don't have the 26th day of the 4th month. And it's going to be that Stephen is going to write me, and he's going to make an argument for July 18 based upon a count of a half of the year as being 180 days of a prophetic year and counting 180 years from 1840 to 2020. So he's going to give a type of confirmation. But what I do is I then use Ezekiel's prophecy, not Ezekiel's, Josiah Litch's prophecy to confirm the 26th day of the fourth month. But I'm not going to address that right now. I'm going to backtrack a little bit. So the 10th day of the fifth month, and I'm going to just move through some of these slides that have it. Okay, so there's lots of things that's not the ones I want. I gotta go back. Here it is. Okay, so this goes back to a study on the week of Christ. Now, I know this study has still confused people to a large degree. But in 2018, my primary study that I'm doing is dealing with Christ's 70th week. That is, in 2017, we had studied Samuel Snow's letters. We had put them on a line, and we had noticed that Samuel Snow had addressed this idea of the midst of the week. And so in, I think is late January, early February, I started doing this study on the 70th week. I was looking at this midst of the week, trying to understand its significance. And so we all had this impression that, you know, the 70th week is 20 days, right? Because, you know, we're taking a prophetic symbolic 7 years, and there's 20 days in 7 years of 360 days. But in reality, that wouldn't be the case. That is, Christ is not living with the 360-day calendar. At that time, they have a calendar that's the biblical calendar, and it has years of 354 days, give or take a day. And then every 2 or 3 years, they have a year that has 384, give or take a day, right? And so those over time, in a metonic cycle, for instance, in a period of 19 years, you're going to have 12 what they call common years and 12 embolismic years. So the common years are just 354, and then the embolismic years are 384. And so you're going to have 7 of those of the embolismic and 12 common. So it's going to be 19 years. It's going to be a period of 235 months on, you know, the months that you see if you observe the moon, not the months that we have on our calendar, right? So some of the years will have 13 months and some will have 12. So if you had 7 years and you had 12 months in a year, how many months would you have? Anybody good at math in their head? So if you had 12 times 7, you would have 84 months, right? Now, what if we had 19 years? You'd have 228, and then you would have 7 years where you have an extra month. So you would add 7 years to 228, and you get 235. So you have 235 months in a period of 19 years. Okay? So hopefully that's called a metonic cycle, named after Meton, a Greek mathematician or something. So, but in the week of Christ, that means we're going to have some years that are going to have 13 months, right? You're actually going to have 2 years that have 13 months. The other ones have 12 months. So it's not going to be 84 months. It's going to be, 86 months. Okay? that make sense? And so it's going to go from the 10th day of the 7th month to the 10th day of the 7th month. It's actually going to be 87 months. There's going to be three years in there actually that have, so it's going to be 87 months. That's what it is. So if I take 87 and I multiply it by 29.530587, I'm going to get 2,569 days. So how many days more is that than 2520 days? 2,569 is how many days more in that week of Christ?
Is that 49?
Yeah, so 49 days more, right? So if we do the cardinal count, it's going to be 2,569 days, 49 days more than 2520 days. Now, what you're looking at here right now is how we imagine the week of Christ. We're going to start it on the 10th day of the 7th month in 27 AD, and end it on the 10th day of the 7th month in 34 AD. And in the center, you're going to have the cross. Now, we had people talking about how there is 2520 evening and morning sacrifices offered from when Jesus is baptized to when he is crucified. Now symbolically that's true, but literally it can't be. Now, what's the first thing we notice about this chart here? If Jesus is baptized on the 10th day of the 7th month, and he's crucified on the 14th day of the 1st month, we can see that it's not 1,260 days from the baptism to the crucifixion, right? And why not? Like, even if we're not counting literal days, we're just counting symbolic days. Why is it not 1,260 days?
I think that even the baptism would have fallen on the 10th of the 7th month.
So you think what? That it didn't?
I think if at all, like as you've said, the baptism could have also fallen on the 12th or on the 10th day of the 7th month, not the 14th of the 1st.
Right. So the baptism would be on the 10th day of the 7th month, but he dies on the 14th day of the 1st month. And if you had 30-day months, that would be 1,264 days. Now, we don't have 30-day months, right? Because they didn't use 30-day months and 360-day years, right? They observed the sky. So, but you can see there that it still doesn't work out to 1,260. And then on the other side, you're going to have 1,256 days. So it's going to be 4 days short. So even if we took this symbolic period of 2520 days, it doesn't work out to 1,260 days, which would be 2520 morning and evening sacrifices. So it just doesn't work. But this is of course just dealing with symbolism. If we actually deal with, and that's not the chart I want, it's this one here. So in this chart, well, there's a lot happening here, but you see I put 1,260 days on either side of the cross, and I put the actual 10th day of the 7th month in 30 AD, or in 27 AD, pardon me, when Jesus is baptized, and the actual 10th day of the 7th month in 34 AD when Stephen is stoned. And you can see that if I put 1,260 days on either side of the cross, that to get to 10th day of the 7th month in 27 AD, it's going to be 46 days short. That is, the period of time is actually 1,306 days from the 10th day of the 7th month when Jesus is baptized until the 14th day of the 1st month when he is crucified. So it's actually a lot longer than 1,260 days. It's not just 4 days longer. It's actually 46 days longer. Now, the first thing I noticed when I saw this is I recognized that this 46 days, that we could look at this in comparison to this. So what you have here is the week of Christ in a symbolic sense, right? You have 27 AD, the 3.5 years, 1,260 days, 2520 days. Then you have the 1,260 days on the other side. And then you got this 2520 years of the Satanic Covenant week, right? So paganism is counterfeit of the earthly sanctuary. It's going to scatter the power of the holy people for times and a half. That's Daniel 12:7. And then from 538 AD, you have 3.5 years of the treading down of God's people by the papal power, Daniel 7:25. So I recognized that I could take this going from right to left, and that I put on the bottom. I could put that 2 periods of 1,260 days. 538 AD represents the cross in the counterfeit, right? So I have the cross is April 27th, 31 AD. And on the bottom, I have 538 AD. I'm just going to zoom in just so some people might not be able to see this really well. And then I have 723 BC. That's when the 1260 begins for the daily. And then I have 1798 on the left side. And so you can see on the bottom, I'm going from right to left, the way that Hebrew is written. On the top, I'm going from left to right. So I'm just going, as we normally would draw a line. The left side's going to be earlier, and the right side's going to be later. But the bottom is the opposite, which is totally allowed, but it's interesting. And then that means that we can go the 46 days, which is going to represent Jesus's baptism. In 27 AD, it's going to be September 30th, the 10th day of the 7th month. And that lines up with 1844 on the bottom, right? Now, when I first presented this, I'm going to present this at Collins Place. I'm going to draw this out. I'm going to show the literal week of Christ. And I'm going to talk about this 10th day of the 7th month and how it lines up with 1844. And that this is showing this prophetic mirror. And the question was asked, and this is going to be Bonnie who asked the question. She says, well, what other date would you put here that would line up with, that would sort of confirm this, that would line up with another date? Okay. Now, at the time, I didn't have some of the tools and resources I have here. So it actually is August 6th, but it's the 10th day of the 5th month. So what we have here is 538 AD and 70 AD. So 70 AD is going to be the 10th day of the 5th month. So what I did roughly at the time is I said, well, okay, well, if I was going to pick a date, so before we even talked about 70 AD or anything, and she asked this question, I started thinking, what date would confirm the week of Christ? Now, the week of Christ study comes from Daniel chapter 9. So let's go there. So in Daniel chapter 9, we're all familiar with the 70 weeks. But it's these last two verses of Daniel 9 that are the important ones. It says, after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. So it's going to talk about the crucifixion of Christ in the midst of the week. And what's the next thing it's going to talk about? The destruction of Jerusalem by Titus, right? That's going to be Rome. The prince that shall come is Titus, and the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. So that's referring to 70 AD. And then it says in verse 27, and he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease, And for the overspreading of abominations, he shall make it desolate. And again, that's going to be referring to the destruction of the city and the sanctuary in 70 AD. This one's, more sacrifice and oblation, really talking about making the temple desolate. So it's really about the destruction of the temple. So I said, well, if I was going to look for a date on this chart to confirm that this is correct, I would look for the date in 70 AD. And so I would put 70 AD on there and see if I get the 10th day of the 5th month, right? So before I had ever done this, I just said, that's what I would do, right? She asked the question, what date would you use? And I said, well, the destruction of the temple on the 10th day of the 5th month in 70 AD. Now, the number of days from 538 AD, from the number of years from 538 AD to 70 AD is 468 years, right? Simple math. You just subtract 70 from 538, you're going to get 468. So what I did then is I counted 468 days from April 27th, 31 AD. Now, you could count it cardinally or ordinally. Now, originally, I just counted it cardinally. And when I did that, I came to August 7th. But actually, August 7th isn't the 10th day of the 5th month, it's August 6th. And I realized later that I needed to count it ordinally. That is, the first day is going to be the day of the cross, just in how that we did it. And it's kind of hard to explain. I'd have to show you. I drew it all out. So the 10th day of the 5th month is, and that's not correct. So I have to remember this. So actually, in 70 AD, it's going to be August 6th. But in 32 AD, it's going to be August 7th. That's what I did wrong. I always forget this because remember, this on the top, it's not giving me 70 AD, right? You can see that it's 32 AD, right? So I'm counting 32 AD. But what I'm going to find out is the date on the biblical calendar that's 468 days after April 27th, 31 AD, is going to be August 7th, right? So August 7th, and I'm just going to check this now if this was correct. So I'm going to go to the calendar converter here. And so here's what we're going to do. No, it's going to be August 6th. And I'm just going to see how I do this. So I might have had it right. So yeah, so that's right. So it should be August 6th. Sorry about that. I just haven't corrected some of my old charts because this chart I made back in 2018 before we had the calendar converted, right? So anyway, when I looked it up and I figured out the biblical calendar, it was the 10th day of the 5th month. And the 10th day of the 5th month, according to the calendar converter, is August 6th. And it's the 468 days, okay? So what this shows is that in this week of Christ study, I could mark 70 AD and it would give me the 10th day of the 5th month. Does that make sense to people? Because some people it doesn't. I don't know if I don't explain it well, but we have dates on the top. So you count 468 days from when Jesus is crucified, and you're going to come to the 10th day of the 5th month in 32 AD. And that's going to line up on the bottom with 70 AD, the date in which the temple is destroyed in 70 AD. It's not destroyed in 32 AD. It just gives you the biblical date. right? Just like on the left side, it's going to give you 10th day of the 7th month in 27 AD, but that's going to line up with 1844.
Yeah, okay, I see the mirror now.
Okay, right.
Yeah, I see, because you have the
Now,
4
now
and the
you,
15.
yeah,
The 4 and the
so
15
we're on the
equals
left
19, so I was looking at that.
yeah, you can see the prophetic mirror. And then we count 19 days, it's going to bring us to 1863, which is actually September 11th on the Julian calendar in 27 AD. And we could keep moving to the left, and that's going to bring us to the future, right? So back at this time, I just had up 2017 was Passover, April 10th in 27 AD. There's a whole other story behind this, but I don't want to I don't want to confuse things too much here at this point. I just want to point out simply that we have this symbol of the 10th day of the 5th month, and that this symbol is attached to the week of Christ study. So in 2018, that's what I'm presenting. I present the week of Christ study from, and I just want to get the right date here because I mentioned it last night in my study. So Jeff is going to come to Alberta in 2018, and he's going to present that study that Stephen did regarding the time in the holy place and in the most holy place that we looked at last night. But we're gonna have this camp meeting, and that's going to be from August 6th to August 11th. So I was thinking it was August 11th to 15th, but it's August 6th to August 11th. So it's kind of interesting that it started on August 6th, and that it's going to end on August 11th, right? So it was just an interesting little detail, I thought, when I was looking at this. So it's August 6th to 11th. And so I'm going to present the week of Christ study during that camp meeting. And I believe that Jeff actually doesn't show up on the first day, though. I think he shows up on like the 8th of August or something like that. But I'm not certain. But anyway, the camp meeting is from 6th to 11th. And so I'm going to be studying and presenting this week of Christ. Now, I get invited during that camp meeting, well, the day after the camp meeting, Jeff, or the day, I think actually on August 11th, he invites me. And then Heidi and I give our response to him the next day, which is Sunday. We say, yeah, okay, we're planning on coming. You know, at first we were talking about like having some kind of fleece put out, but Jeff just says, you know, you just got to come, right? So we made plans then to go. So we ended up getting there at the end of August. We got to Arkansas, and we stayed there until in February. So we came back in February, I believe. Could have been late January. Can't remember the date right now. But anyway, during that time when I was there, I presented on the week of Christ. So I presented it at the camp meeting in the summer, and my main interest was to present that at the School of the Prophets. And it was actually the two presentations that I had on the week of Christ at the camp meeting in October of 2018. That was just from my study that I had been presenting, you know, through that time. So I was going to present it at the camp meeting there again in Arkansas. But it occurred that on October 13th that I had this information regarding the 391.5. And so I did two studies on that as well. But this 10th day of the 5th month study, you can see why it becomes important. So I've now focused on this week of Christ. I've focused on the 10th day of the 5th month. And we now have this new prediction, November 9th, 2019. And in that prediction, these different studies come together, right? So part of the whole issue with these studies, when we go back here, right? So I'm just gonna, is this the one I want? No. Here, this one on the bottom, right? So now we have this November 9th, 2019, but we have symbols here that tie us to the prophecy of Josiah Litch, the July 27th prediction of Daniel from Brazil, the August 11th, that's the center of this. The 391.5 days connects us to Ezekiel and to Josiah Litch's prophecy, right? The 120 days that I marked there, the 126 days, all these things that parallel with Samuel Snow's letters. You can see above there is these two Pentecosts. So in 2017 and 2018, or not Pentecost, but 9/11 prayers, one at Pentecost. And I'm trying to figure this out. It says Sabbath begins. This one should be the Sabbath ends. So these are just old charts on June 20th. And this is going to be June 9th, not June 2nd. Okay. So you're going to have the June 2nd prayer. That's going to be in 2017 at 9:11 p.m. He makes this prayer. And, oh, wait, no, never mind. I'm reading this wrong. Yeah, this is just 2017. This is 2018. Yeah, I think I made this mistake. So he's going to have this prayer. It's going to be 120 minutes that he presents. So it's kind of weird the way I drew out this diagram. So this is one I actually presented at the camp meeting in 2018. So it's the end of Pentecost. So it's really going to start like a 7:11 p.m. that he's going to start his presentation. Now, some criticism has happened that it wasn't actually 120 minutes. It was an hour and 20 minutes that his presentation was. And the idea is that 120 is a symbol of Pentecost. But anyway, that was stuff that was presented in 2018. But at the bottom, we have this 391.5 days. And I'm directed to a Josiah Litch's prophecy and to Ezekiel's prophecy. So both of those prophecies come together. Let's see what this next chart is. This is connecting that prayer. 391.5 brings me to June 15th, 2018. It's June 15th. Anyway, that's too complicated to explain. We looked at this one. And there we have. So I'm trying to find the chart. So this one here, some of these charts are confusing. I should really delete some of my old charts because they just kind of get in my way. Yeah. So we're going to have Samuel Snow's letters gives us this July 18th date, right? And it gives us this November 9th confirmation. And which is the one I used. And I might not have drawn this out, actually. That could be why I don't have it. Because at the time I drew it on the whiteboard when I presented. So when I presented it the first time, I had not actually figured it out completely, right? This connection between Samuel Snow's letters. So I think this chart on the bottom would be the closest, right? It's the one that I showed you earlier. You can see I have this July 18, 2020. But that is a Julian date. The 10th day of the 5th month, not a Gregorian date. And so we did a bunch of stuff here. I'm just skipping through this quickly. So I think that's it when it comes to these charts. Here's the one I want. It's the one on the top. So this is what Stephen and I did. Though he wasn't there, he was in Ireland. So we took Josiah Litch's prophecy, and I already had July 18, 2020, Julian, the 10th day of the 5th month. And then Stephen took this 391 years, which is 391 years and 15 days. 15 days is an hour. So an hour, day, a month, and a year. You can see those there. And he said, well, it's a half a month, but we're using a half a year. And a half a year is 6 months. And 6 months is 100, prophetic time is 180 days. So if we count 180 years from 1840, it'll bring us to 2020. Now, I can't remember the math he did. He made a mistake. But then what I looked at simply was the symbol of the date, the 26th day of the 4th month. And so we found that the 26th day of the 4th month was July 18, 2020, just as the 10th day of the 5th month was July 18 on the Julian calendar in 2020. Now, the chance that that would occur, that these two symbols, the one from Ezekiel and the one from Josiah Litch's prophecy, and the one from Ezekiel is based upon the prophecy of Josiah, right, to come to the understanding of it. The chance that they would both yield a July 18th date in 2020 is extremely unlikely, right? Because they're 13 days apart. The 26th day of the 4th month and the 10th day of the 5th month are 13 days apart. And it just so happens in our century and in the 1900s as well, that there's 13 days between the Julian and the Gregorian. The Julian calendar is 13 days behind, right? So you have to wait.
They just
13.
happened to line up on that date.
Yeah, they just happened to line up. Like, so to me, this was absolutely incredible that would occur by chance. Now, I am going to do a presentation after I did that presentation at, so in 2018, I'm not talking about a presentation I'm going to do now, but I did a presentation on Sabbath, November 10th, I believe. And that presentation, so I had figured out this July 18, 2020. And then I did a presentation on Ezekiel's wheels. So those are the wheels within wheels. And that presentation, I was looking at this paper dealing with the Mayan calendar. So I'm going to show you this here. Now, we have some problems with our calendar converter when we go way back in the past. So sometimes these things are off a little bit, but I'll show you what we have here. I can't remember. This is calendar converter version 2. I think version 1 is actually correct. I think this one's not. But what I'm going to do is bring you to this date. So you can see on the Mayan calendar here at the bottom, just set it to 0. Okay. And so when I set it to 0, it's going to show up at the top the 9th day of the 5th month. Now it's going to show August 11th. Now, this is incorrect. That is, the biblical date should be the 10th day of the 5th month based upon how the calendar was done before the flood. So there is a difference of the pre-flood calendar and even the calendar after the flood than the calendar that was given to the Israelites at the Exodus. So there's going to be slight differences there. But here in this history, what I found is this guy made this statement in that the Mayan calendar is going to begin 00000, 5 zeros, on August 11th, 3113 BC. And he's correct. right? Now, that date happens to be the 10th day of the 5th month. That is, if you go by the moon, that is, when we look in the past, before the Exodus, they're going to go by the moon every month. After the Exodus, they're going to have a preset 30, 29, 30, 29, 30, 29 for the first 6 months. And then after that, they're going to use the moon. So I'm not going to go into the history of that. But anyway, this August 11th date, when I looked at the moon cycle, I found that this was the 10th day of the 5th month in 331 BC. But notice it's a Gregorian date, right? Normally, when we talk about dates in biblical history, we use Julian dates. And this guy actually made the assumption it was a Julian date, right? So what I first looked for was the Julian date, 3113 BC. And when I looked at August 11th, and this is the Julian date, I have to go there. And when I looked at August 11th in 3113 BC, and again, this calendar converter's off here in these old dates. You'll notice that it's actually not 0000. There's a 17 here, and that 17 you would multiply by 20, and 17 by 20 is what, 340? So this is actually 340 days into the Mayan calendar. But this date here is the 26th day of the 4th month. So it says the 24th day of the 4th month, but it's actually the 26th day of the 4th month, if we use the biblical calendar. So when I first looked at it, I saw this 26th day of the 4th month. So that's the one date that we have for July 18th. But then when I looked at the actual date, I saw that it was the 10th day of the 5th month. That August 11th, 3113 BC Gregorian was the 10th day of the 5th month, and 3113 BC Julian was the 26th day of the 4th month. And that's not to be expected, right? It's not something that you would expect that you're going to find that coincidence. Okay. So this 10th day of the 5th month, the destruction of the temple. Why is Ezekiel drawing us to that date? What would be the significance for us? So we expected the 10th day of the 5th month to have to deal with in 2020, because in Ezekiel, certain of the elders of Israel are going to come and sit before him. So if you go to Ezekiel 20, it came to pass in the 7th year, in the 5th month, in the 10th day of the month, that certain of the elders of Israel came to inquire of the Lord and sat before me. And so originally I said, well, maybe, after the destruction of Nashville, 13 days later, maybe the church is going to come and ask us. That was the guess that I had made. But in these chapters, chapter 20, 21, 22, 23, he's going to describe the destruction of Jerusalem that's coming, right? Which is going to happen on the 10th day of the 5th month, especially in regard to the temple.
Is that rabbinic? Rabbinic 10th day, 5th month?
No, it's the biblical. Well, the rabbis didn't exist back then.
Okay.
So technically, it's going to be according to the Babylonian calendar, because that's the calendar they're using at that time.
Let's see. Okay.
So yeah. So when we go to, I'll show you here. I'll go back to this calendar converter. Yeah, and Aran and I really need to clean up some of the problems with this calendar converter on the old dates. They drift a bit. Works all for all the the other dates, not for some of these dates way back before the flood. So if we're going to go to in 591 BC, and you want to go to the 10th day of the 5th month,
August 15th. On there.
Well, the 10th day of the, so you're going to see that this is the biblical calendar up here, but the biblical calendar is a fixed calendar. But down here we have the Babylonian calendar. So yeah, so it's going to be, yeah, so this is August 14th, 591. So that's going to be, and you see here it says the 10th day,
Oh, yeah.
the fifth
I was
day.
talking August 15th.
Yeah, that's going to be the day when he lies on his right side. So this is the day when he finishes lying on his left side. And you can
So
see that
15th,
it's the 10th day of the fifth. It's the 10th day of the fifth month on the Babylonian calendar. I'm just showing you that they're different. So the
okay.
Babylonian calendar is the 10th day of the fifth month, and the biblical calendar had the 11th day of the fifth month. And this is the last day he lies on his left side, right? The next day he's going to lie on his right side. That's going to be August 15th.
I
Okay.
see now.
Right? But the Babylonian and biblical calendar don't line up in that year. So when we go to his vision, his third vision that happens on the 10th day of the fifth month, you can see that in that year they happen to line up, right? So on the Babylonian calendar, it says the 10th day of Abu. And then up here, the biblical calendar says the 10th day of Av, right? So they happen to line up in that year, but not in the previous year. Okay. And you can see the rabbinic says the 11th day of the sixth month. So the rabbinic is quite a bit off, like a month and a day. Okay. So some people try to use the rabbinic, but it drifts quite a bit, especially as you go back in the past. It can be like 3 days off. So, because it's following a metonic cycle, which isn't exact. But anyway.
You say the safe bet is to use the biblical calendar?
Well, generally we use the biblical calendar, but we have to fix it in these earlier dates before the flood and so forth, because sometimes it's off by a day, not always, sometimes. And then in this case, during the Babylonian captivity, the Jews are using the Babylonian calendar. Right? So, I mean, Ezekiel's in Babylon. He's using the Babylonian calendar. He's not using the biblical calendar. And we can demonstrate this other ways too. But anyway, so dealing with this 10th day of the fifth month, it is a symbol. And the symbol is that certain of the elders of Israel are going to inquire. So I still believe that this symbol that we had relates to something that's going to happen in this movement. At some point in this movement, people are going to inquire of us. And that's symbolized by the 10th day of the fifth month, when Jerusalem is destroyed. And it could be when the Seventh-day Adventist Church falls apart or something. I don't know. Like just ceases to exist. I have no idea. All I know is it's a symbol. And that this symbol shows up in our prediction of July 18, 2020, and it shows up in impossible ways. Okay? And any final questions on this? Hopefully that was simple enough. I tried to make it simple.
I think it answered my question.
Yeah,
a couple dates there.
Yeah,
August.
I tend to rush through it, lots of times, and I try to take my time on this, and we're going to go over these things again. Next week, I want to look at some more of the symbols regarding the 26th day of the fourth month. So we're going to look at Josiah Litch's prophecy in a bit more detail in regarding the prediction, and definitely how we tried to connect it to Nashville, what that was all about. So we're going to start looking more into July 18th, because we're now starting to get into 2019 and a lot of the symbols that we came to understand. And we're going to look at the Mayan calendar a bit more as well, and why I believe July 18 failed, and etc. So any final thoughts before we close with prayer?
Just
Okay.
concerning the baptism of Christ on the 10th day of the 7th month.
Mhm.
Would they uh, would they not have been observing that as a fast day?
Yeah. Yeah. Of course they would.
Right, okay, thanks.
Yeah. So we can't prove that Jesus is baptized on that day. But I think it's we know the 70th week starts on the 10th day of the 5th month, or 10th day of the 7th month, pardon me, because it ends on the 10th day of the 7th month. And the 70 weeks begins on the 10th day of the 7th month. And the 2300 days begins and ends on the 10th day of the 7th month. And so the most likely thing is he actually gets baptized on that day. But, maybe he was baptized a few days later or something, I don't know. But I just put that as the baptism day.
Yes,
But
but
yeah.
they wouldn't have been doing anything with the scapegoat or anything like that.
You're saying like in the temple itself? Well, the
Yes.
question is, so first off, they had a fast day, but they don't have the Ark of the Covenant in the sanctuary. And I don't believe that they were observing the Day of Atonement in strict accordance with the guidelines given in Leviticus, because they couldn't. And we know that in Nehemiah that they couldn't observe the Day of Atonement. And that's why they were mourning, but they decided to still keep the Feast of Tabernacles. So my understanding is that the Jews just would fast on the Day of Atonement, but they weren't observing all of the offerings because they didn't have the Ark.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Now I could be wrong about it, but I know they don't have the Ark. So they did have the other furniture, though. They did have the lampstand and the altar of incense and the table of showbread, but the Ark had been hidden by Jeremiah before the destruction of the first temple. So, okay, good question. Okay, well, let's close with prayer. Dear Father in heaven, thank you for the Sabbath and for the time that we have together. I pray for a blessing for each person, and that you can continue to be with us throughout these Sabbath hours. Thank you for loving us, for caring for us, and we pray for one another. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.